Can everyone hear me without the mic?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
One of the first times that photography appears on the Victorian stage is when Salem Scudder, the Yankee overseer and photographer of Dion Boucicault's Octoroon, brandishes a photographic plate as evidence of murder. Addressing the scheming Irish murderer McCloskey and showing the plate both to the hastily assembled jury and audience, he cites photography's status as an unimpeachable witness. Quote, "The apparatus can't lie." Quote, "You slew him with that tomahawk, and as you stood over his body with the letter in your hand, you thought that no witness saw the deed and no eye was upon you. But there was, Jacob McCloskey, there was. The eye of the Eternal was on you, the blessed Son in heaven, that looking down struck upon the plate the image of the deed. Here you are in the very attitude of your crime." Echoing Henry Fox Talbot's famous comparison of photography to the pencil of nature, Scudder represents his as an image without an agent or author, and therefore a form of implicitly reliable proof, both legal and theatrical, an instrument of justice. Jennifer Green Lewis cites the scene in Boucicault's play and suggests that by 1859, the use of photography in court, quote, "was well on its way to becoming a standard practice." While it was certainly cited as a potential source of evidence as early as the 1840s, photography didn't have official status as evidence and wouldn't until the last decades of the 19th century. Given this, McCloskey's response to Scudder is apt. Quote, "What court of law would receive such evidence?" His question is also irrelevant, however. Despite the fact that Scudder ostensibly appeals to a set of jurymen, his speech and his evidence are addressed to and grounded in an extra-legal framework, addressed both to an unofficial jury in a swamp-based court and to the theatrical audience. As if speaking to both audiences, Scudder says, quote, "Fellow citizens, you are convened and assembled here under a higher power than the law. Photography doesn't just work in the service of this higher power, it represents and materializes a power literally above the law, acting as the eye and judgment of the eternal, and an extension of the audience's judgment." In representing the camera as an instrument of divine justice, Boucicault aligns the technological with the supernatural. Quote, "Oh, you wanted evidence, you called for proof, heaven has answered and convicted you." At the same time, by showing the plate the way he does, he positions the photograph as simultaneously theatrical and anti-theatrical, as a form of performance and as capable of producing a truth beyond performance. As Adam Sonstagard has argued, quote, "The Octoroon stages photography as if photography could not possibly be staged." But by mobilizing photography in the service of a murdered slave, Boucicault uses this higher power to bypass both the racial inequalities of Southern plantation life and the realities of U.S. antebellum law. It literally and figuratively operates as a deus ex machina, a god in the photographic machine. In doing so, Boucicault aligns photography's power to catch the criminal in the act and the power to offer documentary proof with a form of racial justice, but one only available in the spatial and temporal world of the theater. At the same time, however, Boucicault attempts to cordon off photography from the theatricality which surrounds it. The objective autonomy of the photographic machine is given emphasis within the play. Scudder's camera barely requires human intervention. Even the plate develops itself through a, quote, self-developing liquid Scudder claims to have invented. Boucicault's play appears 30 years before the Kodak and its famous slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest," but in obviating the need to even lift a finger, Scudder's camera anticipates a technology closer to the disembodied eye of the eternal of our own current surveillance society. Ultimately, the only successful picture in the play is the one taken where no one's operating it, the photograph that would catch McCloskey red-handed standing over Paul's lifeless body. Boucicault represents us with the spectacle of photography without photographers, a fantasy of automation in the age of mechanical reproduction. And yet Boucicault's representation of photography as a dispassionate, autonomous, and objective technology of justice was an exception to the rule on the Victorian stage. Instead, the majority of plays about photography, appearing from 1858 to the end of the century and beyond, are largely farces and comedies that often puncture photography's pretensions both to a higher aesthetic respectability and to epistemological truth, a status defined by its ostensible separation from theatricality. More specifically, by foregrounding the role of the photographer and the process of taking, making, and sometimes faking photographs, these plays emphasize the performative and illusionary, interactive, and transactional nature of photography. Photography as act, not just as image. At the same time, we can see these plays already thinking as theater as a kind of photography, one at times even more accurate, more, quote, photographic than photography. In this sense, these plays are negotiating between technological and theatrical standards of evidence in surprising ways. If the Octoroon stages photography as a form of non-performative objectivity, a wide range of Victorian plays used photography to frame the world of the theater and theatrical standards of evidence as more, not less trustworthy than technological realism. Today I'll be thinking about the convergence of photography and theater more generally, as well as the epistemological, formal, and aesthetic issues that remediating photography as dramatic spectacle invoked. Because of photography's revolutionary impact on how the Victorians understood vision, spectacle, and representation itself, plays about photography also explore and renegotiate the representational limits and possibilities of both photography and theater. At the same time, the questions that photography on stage brings up overlaps with metacritical and disciplinary tensions between approaches to theater in literary and theater and performance studies that, broadly speaking, center around the distinction between text and performance. If, as Peggy Phelan argues, the, quote, ontology of performance is in its resistance to reproduction and its, quote, disappearance and ephemerality, what happens when it stages the technology associated with the desire for a kind of material permanence? Foregrounding both photography's complicated relationship to time, at once present, past, and future, in its ostensible role as a recording technology, these plays explicitly and self-reflexively dramatize the question the distinction between the ephemeral theatrical experience and the transmissible visual object, between the recorded and the live, and the image and event. Writers have noticed the intersection of photography and theater since the medium's invention. As many critics have pointed out, photography had its origins in theatrical spectacle and spectacular technologies of illusion. Lawrence Senelek argues that from the beginning, the photographic studio was patterned on the theater, quote, a reduced model of the proscenium stage. The use of elaborate props and costumes in the studio, in addition to photography's role in publicizing actors and plays, only reinforced this association. Other forms of visual and theatrical performance, like tableau vivant, also influenced photographic aesthetics, and in turn, quote, performative activities that called for dressing up and posing, such as charades, tableau vivant, and amateur theatricals, would often act as occasions for the making of photographs. As Carol Armstrong notes, quote, all of Julia Margaret Cameron's photographs are the result of home-produced theatricals. Tableau vivant were, of course, not just part of private theatricals, but were, quote, in their frozen pictorialism, closely related to the climactic pictures of melodrama and the realizing of paintings on stage. In turn, audience increasingly expected photographic realism on stage. Dion Boucicault sums up this demand in mid-Victorian theater, noting that audiences wanted, quote, the actual, the contemporaneous, and the photographic. However, while in the Octoroon, the photographer is eclipsed by the machine in its objective truth, a wide range of Victorian plays represent photography neither as the objective pencil of nature, nor as the eye of eternal justice. The photographer of Frederick Hayes' 1865 farce, A Photographic Fix, for example, is a fraud in business and life. Rather than an instrument of justice, he's the target of commercial vengeance. Unable to fix or make any of his images last longer than a day, he tells one unhappy client that, quote, he never said the images wouldn't vanish. Instead of appealing to the photograph as the arbiter of guilt and innocence, when the photographer is discovered by his fiancée in an embrace with another woman, he tries to convince her that what she sees is a photographic illusion, quote, an optical infusion, a camera of the brain. Yet it's the, quote, naked truth before her eyes that provides both the fiancé and the audience with evidence of infidelity, not the mechanical eye. Rather than operating outside of performance, in the end, photography is explicitly a metaphor for theatrical illusion, imagination, and deception. As the photographer turns to the audience, he says, quote, my attempts at photography haven't been encouraging, but if I've only succeeded in developing a smile and fixing your attention, I shall accept it as positive proof that however exaggerated might have been the lens employed to focus the follies of an hour, it has had at least your approbation, and the artist and his assistants in this tableau will only be too happy to prepare plates for your entertainment, whenever you'll favor us with a sitting. Not only was the human eye superior to the camera lens within the world of the play, but the theatrical performance is a more successful form of image making, beating photography at its own game. At the same time, the play associates the fixing of photographic time and space with the ephemeral time and space of performance. Fraudulent photographers show up fairly frequently in plays about photography. While the former medical student turned photography in a camera obscura from 1879 can't actually operate his camera, the photographer of the 1858 comedy Your Likeness One Shilling finds ignorance and criminality no bar to being a photographer. Quote, "To be sure, I know very little about it, but that does not appear to be of the slightest consequence, if I may judge from the specimens that are shown by photographers." However, the fake photographer is hardly a comic or theatrical invention. In 1882, for example, the British Journal of Photography reports on the case of a sham photographer. Quote, the prisoner had an apparatus with him, and the parties were photographed. They paid him the money he charged, but never received their photographs. A professional photographer was called for the purpose of proving that it would be impossible to take a photograph with the apparatus. The jury found the prisoner guilty, and he was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. In this case, the only criminal caught in the act is the photographer himself. But even in plays with real photographers, they are centered less around the images themselves and more on the photographer and his act of taking a photograph. What Jennifer Green Lewis calls, quote, writing out the photographer in the service of establishing photography's authority and realism, is in Victorian theater reversed with a vengeance. In fact, the focus is so much on both the photographer and the process of taking photographs that some plays never feature or need to display successfully produced images. In the 1898 musical comedietta A Photographic Fog, the drama and comedy centers around a pair of sitters who are both continually confused for each other. Captain Mountjoy is coming to be photographed in drag for a New Woman parody skit, and his aunt has come to be photographed with a bicycle in a bid to change with the times, despite her own nervousness about the prospect. Rather than a drama centering around figures captured by the camera, or a comedy about fading images, it's the people who are continually disappearing. Yet, despite the impossibility of photographing anyone in the play, the cast closes with a threat to take their theatrical photography abroad and capture people in hypocritical and embarrassing situations. Quote, we'll pack up our plates and away we'll go with our cameras instantaneous. We'll harden our hearts to the wind we'll throw, all scruples extraneous. Anyone that we see in a quandary will snap with a smile seraphical, for all is fish that come to the net of a fiend who is photographical. A pompous old gentleman chasing his hat, a dignified lady who's fallen down flat, a couple of lovers who think they're unseen, a bevy of girls, and a bathing machine. Instead of Boucicault's elevated eye of heaven, the surveillance camera is put in the hands of a terrestrial fiend who is photographical, a phrase perhaps taken from the 1890 comic song, The Photographic Fiend. If Scudder's self-developing plate was a technological fantasy, other plays incorporate new developments in photography to comic effect. The sitter in A Photographic Fog refuses to be taken with the new, presumably instantaneous photography. This is particularly odd because she's an experienced sitter who previously sung a song about the best way to pose for a photograph, as well as the value of the photographic test to show us how we actually look in a number of situations. Quote, if anyone at tennis had a longing to disport and rush round in wild excitement about the grassy court, a Kodak would reveal to her if, as the ball she hit, she looked like a spread eagle or a spider in a fit. Instead, the new photography and new technology is deemed necessary to keep up with new realities, not just changes like the speed of modern life, but cultural realities like changing gender politics. Quote, certainly we must keep with the times. New camera, new lens, new woman. In other plays, however, this new technology is usually a ruse for old forms of fraud and even older forms of sexual predation. In an 1879 farce entitled A Camera Obscura, this isn't much of a secret, as the medical student turned photographer is named Lothario Spooner. He's hastily changed his profession after being mistaken for a photographer named Mr. Collodion the night before. He plays along, especially after being asked by a popular actress to take her photograph the next day. Despite not knowing how to work a camera, he takes her visit as an opportunity to pretend to take eroticized pictures of her feet. He continues to use false notions of photographic technique as a way of getting close to her. Quote, the focus, the hocus pocus focus, we must be nearer. Waving off her objection that this will distort the proportion, he touts his patent process that diminishes the size of prominent objects. Finally, after insisting that they takes photograph in the dark, because by, quote, his patent process we take in the dark and develop in the light, he flings the camera to the floor and embraces her, conflating the request for sitters to sit still with the request that she stop struggling. Quote, I am no photographer, I am your lover, your adorer. Don't move, please. Say you will be mine. She is only saved by the photographer's Shakespeare-quoting servant who comes in disguise as the actress's husband. Here, photography threatens to make the performance itself unviewable, as each curtain the photographer draws corresponds to a darkening of the stage. Quote, draws last curtain, stage quite dark. Rather than offering competing modes of image making, here it is only theater that operates in and through the action of light. When sitters aren't afraid of being sexually assaulted, they're afraid for their lives. The sitter in Your Likeness One Shilling refuses to have her likeness taken with new or old methods. Quote, I tell you I wouldn't sit opposite that, pointing to the machine, for all the world. When the photographer approves of her pose, saying, quote, that's it, capital, prime, she responds, quote, prime, oh Lord, it's a gun. Ready, I knew he's going to fire. Chasing her down, the photographer complains, quote, what the devil is the matter with you, ma'am? You come to my establishment to have your likeness taken, and you treat me as if I were going to blow your brains out. This association between cameras and guns shows up in Boucicault's Octoroon, and was a familiar one from Victorian representations of photography in periodicals and cartoons. Technology finally caught up to literature and theatrical humor in the late 19th century with camera guns. Other plays expand the direct threat of the camera as gun into what we might think of as the violence of photographic realism, the conflation of people and pictures, bodies and photographs. Quote, develop me, goodness gracious, what on earth is the man going to do? Put me in a proper case, finish me. Ah, I suspected as much. In Carte de Visite, a reluctant sitter whose wife is a photographic enthusiast overhears her plotting with a French photographer to take his photograph without his knowledge. Unfortunately, he already suspects her of having an illicit affair, and his confusion over photographic terms intensifies his paranoia to the point that he imagines she's contracting for his assassination. Mrs. Winkin, quote, I think I shall merely want my husband's head. Mr. Winkin, good heavens. Monsieur Renaud, that is simple. You had better take it all. It shall suit the cart much better. Mr. Wink, the cart, that's for my body. Monsieur Rayon, he shall know nothing about it, but I want him to stand still and then take him unawares. Mr. Winkin, cut off my head when he catches me unawares and carries my body away in a cart. There was never such a wholesale assassin. What a viper I've nourished in my bosom. For Mr. Winkin, the fiend who is photographical and his hidden camera threatens to take more than an embarrassing photo. For others, the studio is a place of explosive violence, literally, in the case of A Dream, Binks's photographic gallery from 1883. The photographer is tricked into drinking what he thinks is nitroglycerin as a punishment for stealing his sitter's heart from her fiancé and is constantly in danger of exploding. Yet, in all these plays, the effect of literalizing photographic discourse as theatrical spectacle is to disarm and expose photography's violence as laughably ineffectual and purely metaphoric. Ultimately, both its threat, whether of sexual violation, surveillance, or assassination, and its promise of objective realism of nature itself remains elusive. Critics like Harley Ehrman argue that, at least in the Octoroon, the objectivity of photography should be undermined by its appearance on stage, but instead it emerges as the only objective witness. Yet this assumes a single and unchanging photographic imaginary that is then cited or used in an equally static notion of theater. Instead, as we've seen, photography is many things in these plays, but it's seldom an objective witness. In a sense, my comment at the beginning of this play about remediating photography on the Victorian stage is misleading or simplistic. Rather than theater turning photography into something it's not, putting it on stage enables us to see the performative aspects of photography, aspects we tend to ignore in our focus in the photograph's role as fetish object. As Susan Sontag writes, quote, photographs objectify, they turn an event or person into something that can be possessed. Or as Roland Barthes admits, quote, it supplies me with a collection of partial objects and can flatter a certain fetishism of mine. Instead, what these plays help us remember is that photography is not just a medium, object, or technology, not just a set of possessions or partial object, it's also an interaction and an act in the broadest sense of the term. While much of the most valuable work in photographic theory and interdisciplinary literary studies has focused on the photograph as image and object, these plays and this paper ask what happens when we think about photography outside of the semiotic, epistemological, representational, and even visual questions most associated with it. If, as Elizabeth Edwards suggests, we need an alternative to the, quote, traditional art historical address of single images that, quote, focus on the end product of the social and cultural process of photography, Victorian theater's interest in photography as process in similar ways encourages us to rethink our approaches to 19th century photographic culture. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have Annalea Tunesi. She's an independent scholar with a PhD of the University of Leeds, UK. She's also an art director and a set designer. And she studies photography of the 19th and 20th century. And she's presenting a paper on Giuseppe Garibaldi, national hero and symbol of the left, creation of his myth through his photographic portraits. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's my first time in Lisbon, and it's a very beautiful city. So, in this study, I will show you a selection of photographs, wherever possible, in chronological order, and following the evolution of Garibaldi's images as consequences of his political actions. Selecting photographs for this study has not been an easy task, as there is an immense quantity of iconographic material available. I will start here with a very brief introduction with the most significant moments of Garibaldi's life. Garibaldi was born in 1807 near the town of Nice in a humble and simple family. He learned to speak Ligurian and Italian and French, creating a kind of unusual dialect. And in his 20s, he joined the Giovane Italia, a movement created by Giuseppe Mazzini in Marseille in 1831. Mazzini was the journalist and the writer who then became the ideologue of the United Italy. The aim of this association, the Giovane Italia, was to gather Italians from all walks of life, both intellectuals and not, in order to expel foreign rulers and to create the independent, united country of Italy. Garibaldi was a strong believer in Mazzini's vision, widely spreading ideas of the message of what Giovane Italia. And within a short time, he was in the eye of the police and was forced to leave the country, where he was now considered a subversive. At the age of 28, he went to South America, first to Rio de Janeiro, then between 1835 and 1848, he lived and fought in Rio Grande do Sul against the Brazilian government, and later against Uribe, the Argentine director. In this South American period, Garibaldi read and was influenced by Saint-Simon doctrines of universal brotherhood and the extinction of class differences, which became the basis of his political faith. Garibaldi's life in South America has been strongly romanticized. It is said that he was tortured, then was a prisoner, and then he was considered by some a brigand and by others a benefactor. The most interesting aspect of Garibaldi's political aim was the duality between international and national struggles. He was fighting to bring democracy to where it was needed. The concept of embracing different cultures and offering his skills and enthusiasm was the reason for his being called the hero of the two worlds. He was a professional liberator, and as Dennis Mack Smith says in his book dedicated to his life, I quote, "A man who fought for oppressed people wherever he found them. Whatever he did with passion and enthusiasm," unquote. Ordinary people identified with him, and they were ready to follow him in his battles. But how did Garibaldi create his myth? How did his eventual life became one of the most interesting lives of the 19th century in Italy? In her book, Garibaldi, The Invention of a Hero, the scholar Lucy Ryle suggests that the cult was first created by Giuseppe Mazzini as early as 1840s. Since Garibaldi's early and successful battles in Latin America, Mazzini thought that Garibaldi had the right charisma, strength, and appearances to become a new hero. Politically engaged with the United Italy's project, he showed a certain Italianità, a new word signifying the new identity of the new country. So Mazzini began to send photographs of prints after drawings of Garibaldi to various magazines, mainly in Italy. After early and successful battles in 1848, Garibaldi, while in Montevideo, was informed of the Palermo Revolution and of the intention of the King of Sardinia to fight against Austria. He left South America, heading back to his native and not yet united country, to fight foreign oppressor in Italy. From 1848, Garibaldi won several battles called the Guerra di Indipendenza, and in the 11 years that followed, was expelled and exiled and traveled extensively around the world, returning to Italy every so often, cooperating with Mazzini in his project of the united country. And here we can see what is considered the first daguerreotype portrait of Garibaldi taken in New York by the photographer Matthew Brady in 1851. And in this image also, dating 1851, we can see a very unusual Garibaldi wearing bourgeois clothes. He seems to emulating the figure of his mentor Mazzini. The coat, the posture, and the tidy beard make him appear to be a different person. The fighting general wearing colorful clothes has not yet been divulged. While around the world, Garibaldi was seen as a romantic hero. In Italy, this connotation became a national heritage. But because the ambiguity of his political choices, Garibaldi's action, words, and images have been used by both the left and the right, until finally, in 1949, the left adopted his image as their symbol. After the introduction of Mazzini, Garibaldi's life was documented and orchestrated by himself, with many biographies, articles, and stories, both real and fictional. He has been widely interpreted in the principal media of his time: paintings, prints, sculptures, and souvenirs. With the development of photographic portraits and the invention of the carte de visite, the materiality of photographs, the object in themselves, accelerated the process, generating a Garibaldi mania. The process of his memorialization, therefore, began at a very early stage of his career. The memory of Garibaldi was already present when he was alive, which was a very modern concept for the time. In Italy, in provincial towns and in the countryside, many boys were called, as a Christian name, Giuseppe Garibaldi, just to pay tribute to the hero. With this portrait by Duroni and Murer, dating between 1853 and 1860, shows the gradual transformation of Garibaldi. The photograph has an interpretation, sort of painting has been retouched. Over the years, Garibaldi was mostly portrayed wearing three different kinds of outfits: the gaucho with the poncho and two different hats, the loose blouse and the foulard, the hat and the trousers as his followers, the Garibaldini, and wearing this coat. And this coat was suggesting a sense of military power, the General Garibaldi. All the portraits that follow, and there were many, generated a variety of Garibaldis: bandit, hero, social benefactor, politician, general, simple man, and later on the patriarch. Some of these fictional figures were artificially created. Garibaldi was portrayed by many photographers, both famous and anonymous, and for them obviously it was a privilege to have him as a model. And when he was posing for photographers, Garibaldi was consciously creating a parallel history into one which was written by himself and his biographies. And as Marcia Poynton says in her book Portrayal, portraiture is a slippery and seductive art. It encourages us to feel that then is now and now is then. With these portraits, Garibaldi created a dialogue with his viewers, a perennial dialogue which, whilst creating an historical narrative, also made himself constantly alive. His own way of exorcising death. All his portraits seem to be created for the present as political propaganda, but equally for the future. Through the wide range of visual documentation he left behind, he's still very much alive. He conveyed a sense of his own immortality. And finally, as we will see in the future photographs, his accurate choice of clothes not only characterized his period and political allusions, but it also produced a way of feeling different, of asserting his status, origins, and achievements, and distinguishing himself from the other Risorgimento founders. Together with his followers, the Garibaldini, he created a genre, a style, their political connotation determined by the main element, the red shirt. This was, and still is, a powerful statement. And as I said before, Garibaldi reached the peak of international fame in 1860 after the expedition of Emile in Sicily, when he conquered the south of Italy. Here Garibaldi is wearing a blouse, which was well known red. This kind of loose blouse was adopted by the Italian legionaries enrolled in South America. The color red was associated with liberty, republicanism, and the French Revolution, while the famous foulard around the neck and the shape of the hat clearly refer to the South American gauchos. The gauchos symbolize strength and a certain kind of machismo. The combination of the two, the shirt of Italian legionaries and the gaucho hat and foulard, are clearly a statement and a reference to the South American period, which saw Garibaldi at the highest point of his heroic period. His laid-back posture, his calm expression on his face, and the hands, one in his trousers pocket and the other one as a fist, became symbol of a struggle. The people of both Italy and South America idolized Garibaldi. He was a new Christ, a St. George, and in Milan he was compared to St. Ambrose, the patron of the city. And this is one of the most iconic Garibaldi's images taken in 1862 by Duroni. And I would like to show you this photograph because it has been very widely diffused. In 1864, for instance, Garibaldi visited London, where he was warmly welcomed. His popularity was so great that soon after his departure, biscuits with his name were sold, and also a series of Staffordshire figures, you can see the one on the top, figures showing him in a variety of poses were created to celebrate him. So Garibaldi, from being a political and national symbol, also became a luxury souvenir. Naturally, as you can see in the other photograph, he was commemorated in Italy as a patriot and hero with a variety of bronze sculptures produced and sold after his death. And after his successful Sicilian expedition, Garibaldi in 1862 aimed to conquer Rome. With his soldier, he crossed the region of Calabria through the mountains of Aspromonte. He was wounded and captured by his enemies. And after this, he and his men were sent to Liguria. His hip and his ankle had been very heavily wounded. And this is a very well-known photograph. The image was constructed with the clear intention of depicting a serene Garibaldi who was being well looked after by his doctor. Every single detail plays an important role, beginning with the map at the back, the map of Italy. In the background, we can see very clearly emphasize the south of Italy. The famous Garibaldi hat hangs on the wall and his sword at his side. This image affirms that Garibaldi was still and would be continued to be in power despite the defeat. And here we enter in a bit of a sort of fetishism kind of photograph. Nadar took the photograph of the boot that Garibaldi was wearing the day he was wounded in Aspromonte. The boot has become a reliquary and is now in a museum, in fact. And once again, this gaucho boot reminds us of his South American adventure. This constant reminder of South American period through his clothes is a symbol of his past and future victories. And here we see a very unusual studio reconstruction of a bourgeois interior and Garibaldi wearing his military clothes. And I wonder whether he was trying to create a sort of more connection, more dialogue with the bourgeoisie, who saw him in a very sort of ambiguous position. These two pictures by the photographer Paolo Lombardi show a Garibaldi who is tired but wiser. It is now 1867 and he has fought all his battles. I found these two images extremely interesting because of their pictorial effect. Clearly Lombardi embellished the portraits, retouching them. The one with the red shirt, as far as I know, is probably the only one existent of this particular subject. Interestingly, also, in 1867, Garibaldi took part, together with the Russian anarchist Bakunin, in the Geneva Peace Conference. This photograph, dating from around 1870, is one that has been most frequently used in Italian political propaganda. And once again, symbolically, the use of clothes as a political language is very clear. In the color reproduction using the commemoration of his centenary, published by Il Corriere della Sera, the brightly colored hat and poncho emphasize even more strongly the importance of posture, and one might easily assume that this image could be seen, in this image Garibaldi could be seen as a king. These two photographs, both taken with the clear purpose of providing as much detail as possible to be copied, mainly by sculpture when they were created in immense production of bronzes dedicated to Garibaldi. And here another very iconic image of an old Garibaldi, probably one of the most published in books and commemorative cards, and again a card dedicated to his centenaries as a hero of the two worlds. So due to his nationalistic propaganda, Garibaldi was worshipped by every Italian, independent by his political faith. From the book Garibaldi, Two Centuries of Interpretation, I will just mention some comments from the right and from the left party. Guido Liguori, presenting Gramsci, said that the Marxist Gramsci said, Garibaldi is admired by all parties in Italy because this is what we've been taught. In 1926, Garibaldi quarreled with Mussolini when he stated that there were some heroes who could not possibly be counted as fascist, and one of them was certainly Garibaldi. But here we can see a poster of propaganda by the fascist party in 1920s with a clear visual reference to the Garibaldini. On Mussolini and Garibaldi's grandson, Alberto Malfitano said, the right wing with Mussolini did try to reappropriate the symbol of Garibaldi to his grandson Ezio. Ezio was very close to the fascist movement, working as a diplomat in Mexico. Mussolini needed the name of Garibaldi to have greater approval, especially in 1932 for the celebration of the 50th centenary of Garibaldi's death. Ezio Garibaldi also created a magazine called The Red Shirts. In an article entitled Fascismo Garibaldino, Ezio wrote that similarities between Garibaldi and Fascisti, asserting that the black shirts were a consequence of the red shirts. His brother, who lived in France most of his life, was, on the contrary, a promoter of the left-wing ideology of their grandfather, and because of that, he was arrested during the Second World War and died in 1945 in a concentration camp. And here we can see the stylized image created by the Partito Democratico Popolare, the one on the top on the right, in 1949. And the choice of the color, obviously red, white, and green, are the color of the Italian flag, but red also sort of remind the color mainly used by Garibaldi with his shirts. And next to it, we can see the response of the right with this mirror effect called La Maschera, the mask, Stalin, Garibaldi, Garibaldi, Stalin. And since this Spanish Civil War, a strong re-evaluation of the figure of Garibaldi as a representative of the left had begun. He was seen as the inspiration of democratic politics, especially in the relation to foreign countries. He represented the sense of brotherhood between people, which had always asserted in his lifetime. And here I can show you some more posters from the right. And this one, which is very interesting because it says, Garibaldi says, do not vote for me, I've never joined the left party. So, reading and interpreting Garibaldi and the Risorgimento from the left and from the right is what was happening between 1926 and 1950s. Gramsci, Marx, and Engels, who admire Garibaldi for his achievements, never really consider him a man of the left, whereas the leaders of Partito Popolare Democratico, Palmiro Togliatti and Pietro Nenni, thought that Garibaldi corresponded perfectly to their ideals. So by using the stylized image of the Italian left, not only acquired him as a symbol, but by determining also his ideal and his achievements. After the 1950s until the early 1980s, Garibaldi was almost forgotten. In 1982, the new leader of the Socialist Party, Bettino Craxi, reproposed Garibaldi's ideal as the main source of inspiration in his party. It is well known that Craxi had an incredible collection of memorabilia regarding Garibaldi, and here we can definitely see Garibaldi as a statement. So Garibaldi, in conclusion, is and always will be a controversial figure who will periodically undergo new forms of speculation and reappropriation. However, as the left did not try to manipulate his life and actions as the right did, Garibaldi is now still seen visually and intellectually as a representative of the ideal of peace, freedom, and international brotherhood. Thank you.
I have to talk to this. So, from a paper on a Victorian stage and the relation between theater and photography, we had a paper on the construction of a character, a political character, and in the reality of the construction of Italy as a unification, a united nation. So now we're moving to the Portuguese reality of the first republic. With Nuno Pinheiro. He's a researcher on Instituto Universitário de Lisboa, Centro de Investigação de Estudos Sociais, Sociologia. He has a PhD on history, and he researches on photography and history, and is now presenting a paper entitled Progress, Anti-Clericalism and Modesty. So, go ahead.
I had a few questions about the word modesty and plainness. Well, I must thank the organization for organizing this conference. It's really nice to have so many people here in Lisbon discussing matters on photography, which was not was something unthinkable up to a few years ago. I will speak in English even being in my own hometown, but I'm used to, with so many tourists, and people do always mistake me for a tourist, so I have to speak in English in Lisbon all the time. Well, I'll talk about the theme was the left and photography, and I'm working on Portuguese photography, and it was not so easy to find a theme on this, even if I think there is a very much interesting subject on foreign photographers being in Portugal in the 1970s during the revolution. I think that is one thing I would like to do. I hope someday one of my students will do it. But as I work on the late 19th and early 20th century, well, that was out of my scope. So I will present this paper on the Portuguese Republicans of 1910. Well, there is a methodology. Some questions about methodology. And the question I've worked on from some 20 years is it possible to work, to use photography in history writing? That is a question not so, the answer is not so easy, and it was clearly not easy in the 1990s. Now it's better. Well, I think we can use photography as a subject and as a source, and as societies, as previous papers shown us, express themselves through photography. And photography is present in human life since the 1840s, so I think it's perfectly usable as a subject, as a source for history writing. But, well, with a few Benjamin quotes, I will try to show the opposite. Well, let's say Benjamin was not too optimist about using photography as in history. He tended to not evaluate the realism of photography, and there one quote which I think particularly interesting. Well, this is about Arte, but this one is, I think, the most important. Well, he says, if you show you a photograph of the Krupp factories or some other factory, we'll know nothing about that institution. I think he's talking about capitalism and capitalist work relationships, which might not show immediately in a photography, but I must disagree with him, especially on Krupp, as there is almost 500,000 archive of images on Krupp factories, and there is a large book which was something of an inspiration for me, organized by Professor Tenfeld. I studied with him in Germany, and that book is really a book where photography is the main source for a monumental book on Krupp factory history, and on Krupp family history. So I think photography is worthwhile as a subject, as a source for social history. That's what I'm doing. Well, we can use a series of documents, single images, and we must think on what is photographed and the way it is photographed. I think this is the basic idea. Well, now let's go to the subject. The main question I hear is whether the Portuguese Republicans of 1910 can be considered as the left. I'm not too optimistic about considering them the left, but they were at least opposing a regime, a monarchist regime, which was more right-wing than they were. So I can use them as the left here, even if in global terms they were not the left. They were something of a bourgeois regime, not too special from others, except from that idea of having to fight against a monarchy. Well, but they used some values, and that's what I will try to explore, which may be considered as left-wing. One of them is the ideal of progress, which was not so left-wing as so, but it can be used that. The other one was the anti-clericalism, which was, here it was really a left-wing idea. And then on the first title it was modesty. Now it is plainless. Well, I have some difficulty with words here. It's the idea that they don't try to show too much something of an understatement, not showing too much of opulence and showing a petit bourgeois lifestyle. Well, some of these are rather well known. Some of the pictures I will present are rather well known here in Portugal. The first one is not, but I think they are interesting as so. Well, the ideal of progress is not exclusive to Republicans. All 19th and early 20th century, and now is still obsessed with progress. And this is something about technical progress, science, but also about philosophy and about the ideal of progress in society. Well, but here it is really technological, the progress. I have a mistake here. We have the X-ray, which is a new way of seeing, a way of seeing the unseen. It has new possibilities. It's 1905, it's wrong, it's 1895, but it's something new here. And we have from the very famous Portuguese magazine Ilustração Portuguesa, here an X-ray of the hand of the then Ministry of Justice, Afonso Costa. Well, the question is, why does it appear on a newspaper an X-ray of the hand of the minister? Here it is. It has a ring. It doesn't seem like a wedding ring. Even it's on the left hand, it doesn't seem like being a wedding ring. But I think the idea is clear. The Republicans were trying to show how they were committed to progress, to technological progress, how they would like to make Portugal having greater progress than had up to then. This is from early 1911, so it's very early in Republican Revolution themes, and it's really showing progress and the commitment to progress for the Republican new regime. It's really, the idea is we are identifying with the progress. It is not so different from monarchists. The Dom Carlos was not the last king, but the previous one, which was murdered, not far away from here. He was an amateur photographer, and in a contest he had presented a picture of a moving train. He had took the picture from another moving train. So the ideal of progress was also in the monarchists, but here I think that the commitment here is very clear from the Republicans to progress. Well, anti-clericalism was, a major part of Republican ideology. It was also a major part of all the left-wing ideology in Portugal. In the 19th century, it was one of the main clashes between absolutist, conservative monarchists and liberal, progressive monarchists, and it still is a major theme on Portuguese society. We have shown it in the last days. In the last days, we have the proof of that, but the liberals have confiscated some church buildings and lands and so on. But it was now time for the Republicans to show some real anti-clerical activity. And these are, let's say for the early 1900s, strong images. Well, they try to apply anthropometrics, and they try to apply, and they published it in a major newspaper, again, Ilustração Portuguesa. Very early in the revolution, they tried to apply anthropometrics to Jesuitas. It's a clerical order. Yes, the order of Jesus. The order of Jesus. It's only the culprit in Portugal. It's all the Jesuitas, not other clerical order. Yes, the Company of Jesus. Yes, the Jesus Company. Yeah. Well, they're trying to. What they did is to first apply anthropometrics, and they will try to prove how degenerate and how corrupt they were by using anthropometrics. And it's a large, a long reportage in the newspaper. Well, they show it just about everywhere. Here it is, the symbol of the Company of Jesus. Well, and it goes on. It goes on, and it goes on, and well, this is a bit of bertillonnage of a clergyman, and with the numbers, everything, like they were going to prison. And it was not far away from the truth. They were not going to prison, but they were expelled from Portugal. And they were expelled. This is the next number of the... Yes, and again, they were before in the 18th century and in the 19th, and again. And they were expelled in the middle of the crowd. And this is from the next number of Ilustração Portuguesa. It was a quarterly magazine, so a few days later, they were expelling the Jesuitas from Portugal. So it's clearly shows how the new regime, which was something rather based in Lisbon in the first days, was trying to fight against the church and what they consider to be an obnoxious influence of the Portuguese church and the Company of Jesus. So it's rather strong. Plainless, well, That's the problem of the word problem, but it was not really an ideological difference, but it was a lifestyle difference. The monarchists were very criticized by spending too much on the budget on some luxury items, and Republicans were petit bourgeois leaders, and they lived like that, and they showed they lived like that. It was rather different from the court opulence, and we'll show it right now. And we are here close to one of the next quarter is Teatro de São Carlos, which was the center of luxury at the time. Well, and we have the first prime minister, just a few days after the revolution, and a long reportage on the Teófilo Braga, the first prime minister, which shows it. There are a few of these pictures which are rather well known, but it is a long reportage with some more interesting issues. Well, it shows the Teófilo Braga in his daily life, and shows how his daily life is. And it's easy to see it's really a petit bourgeois style life. He's on his dining room, his family, on his garden. Really, it's absolutely a plain life from in his library. Well, Teófilo Braga was a writer, and so it shows as such. Going home and having some beggars at his door, which is rather interesting. Now people would take away the beggars so not to spoil the picture, but really it's rather realistic. I mean, okay. For one time I'll take less than this. Well, again, leaving home and having some saleswoman selling some fruits and vegetables at his place, which was rather common in Lisbon to have people selling things at the doors, and it was common not up to not too long ago. And now he's talking with another leader, with Manuel da Riaga, and so it's really a very plain life. The better known pictures as this one, as he's going to the office in the tram. The tram was the main transport system in Lisbon. It was not so cheap to go in the tram at the time, let's say, to say the truth. And now it was used now because, there is the same kind of criticism about not current government, but the previous government about using cars and things like that. So it was shown as Teófilo Braga took the public transportation system, why don't you use it? But really the tram was not so cheap at the time, so it's not so direct. But really it shows the petit bourgeois life of a leader of the prime minister, and there is this one is the better known, but there is some subjects like this on other Republican leaders. So it is really a way of showing a different way of being from the previous monarchists, and it was a way of consolidating the new Republican power. This was a small part of Republican propaganda in the press. The press of the late 1910 and early 1911 is very heavy on propaganda, on Republican propaganda. It is a bit naive for now. We say, they're kidding, we don't believe this. But it was effective at the time. And it does, on one part, addresses some of the core of Republican ideology, as really there isn't very much to show the difference between republicans and monarchies, between the besides the anti-clericalism, and it is the way of making that decision. Let's say it was not easy the first years of the Republican Revolution, and this propaganda was quite important in a newspaper which was more a Lisbon newspaper, but it go around all the country. Well, thank you.
Thank you for keeping with time.
Yeah, difficult for me.
So we are perfectly on time. So we have half an hour to have a conversation. Anyone? I'll start. I was thinking about a passage of Aristotle on his rhetorics, about the power of speech and the kind of speeches that we could use to convince our auditory. And there's a passage where he says that a good speaker should read also his poetics, where he talks about performance and the theatrical, the dramatic speech kind of texts. So there, he always thought about the speech also as an act. So we were talking here a little bit about these two dimensions of photography as a performative act, and also as something with the contents, with the message. The first paper of Daniel Novak showed us the relations between the photography as a stage and the stage that was recorded, or the actors that were recorded, and we had a kind of this stage performative thing in all the papers we're talking about. So my question is, photography traditionally, in the first way to talk about photography in photography theory, evidentiates more the objectivity aspects, or the proof as a proof, but always fiction from the beginning has been there. So my question is, how do you see these two dimensions, the documental dimension and the fiction? Because Nuno also talked when he opened this conversation about the history, the uses of photography in history, and how the historian also must not trust entirely on the photography, because these two aspects probably are engaged. So comment on this. Anyone wants to?
Okay. You're the historian, so you have to start.
Okay, I'm the historian, and my PhD, the book, the book which was published, some 10 years ago, it's a long time. It's called O Teatro da Sociedade, the Theatre of Society, and the starting point was that photography is a stage. People are staged in photography, whether it's a portrait, which is obviously staged, but even if it is a snapshot or something like that, or a landscape photography, it's somehow always a stage. So photography has some dynamics going around from the photographer. The photographer chooses what he wants to photograph. It's not so objective as it should be. It chooses how to photograph, the time to photograph, how we would present a photograph. So it's always, there is an objective part, of course, because the photograph is is what it is, and well, we have Photoshop and so on, but and Photoshop is not so new as a concept, not as a tool. Yeah, as a concept and as a tool, it's not so new, but we have some ways of manipulating things and of twisting things around, but photography is rather objective as a medium, but it is a personal choice, and as any other medium, the person behind the camera and the person in front of the camera, they all work together to get the photograph. So it's rather concrete, like Edward Weston would say, and he was an art photographer and not so concerned about objectivity as such. He would say photography is a true medium, but liars can photograph. So photography is always about people, and people who photograph, people who are photographed, and everything is more or less staged, and we can have a real stage, and well, thinking about the 35mm camera. Now a digital camera or a mobile phone, it's too little to show, but thinking about the 35mm camera, we have a 3.5 centimeters wide stage, so it's a stage, and it's always staged. And what I show is, well, how Portuguese Republicans staged themselves, and let's say they were no heroes like Garibaldi. They were common people. They staged themselves as common people. They say, well, what people would think was, well, this gentleman is the prime minister, but he's just like the guy who lives next door, and he's not a hero. Garibaldi was a hero here too. But Teófilo Braga was no hero. It was well off. No, not everyone lived like that, but it was somehow common people. They staged them as common people. Yes.
In my particular case, I think Garibaldi, in that specific moment in Italy, needed to be the hero, to have as much as possible of followers. So this idea, I really found fascinating when I was reading these photographs. If you look at the details, every single detail of the clothes has a particular message. And this had an enormous impact in Italian culture because a lot of people were wearing as well, like Garibaldi. I mean, it became like a fashion. But, the poncho, for Italian people, the poncho is, if you wear a poncho now, people say to you, are you wearing the same thing that Garibaldi was wearing? Even now. So it's been very, very, the fact that he was using photographs in that sense is sort of, he was a precursor of Vogue somehow, I would say. I mean, it's ridiculous what I'm saying, but it's absolutely true. And the political message was really, really powerful. So he did work very well. What I found fascinating is the fact that he was actually performing, he was the director of himself. He was the director of himself, so he was covered absolutely, because all the photographs were taken in studio, in photography setting, especially created to promote himself. But certainly the photographer was working with him, but he was the one who was deciding what kind of message. So definitely for him, theatre, and we got, in that period we got opera with Verdi. I mean, is a moment where in Italy the theatre is really, really political. It's very, very important. So there is also this kind of comparison, and the things they were completely. And one of his biographers was Alexandre Dumas. When Dumas listened to Garibaldi's life, said, I'm going to make a novel out of it.
It was a novel.
But actually it was his real life. What is interesting about Garibaldi was he was going around with these clothes. I mean, only at the beginning he had a sort of more quiet and bourgeois kind of outfit. But then, all his life, there are millions of photographs of Garibaldi also reproduced after his photographs. So there is also this aspect, copied and paintings.
Maybe a
the carte de visite copied.
commerce,
Oh yes, there were millions of carte de visite copies and transformed. So it's the political message was coming really, really powerfully, and he was clever to use it.
Let me say just a small note, but it is just because it is connected to this very same building. In 1973, just before the revolution, there was a group of high school students who were arrested in Lisbon in a meeting. There were more than 170 or so. And there were more boys than girls. And the boys all, 1973, we have always, everybody have red hair. And for kids 15 to 17 or 18, everyone has red hair. And one of the things they did to them, in this very same building, was to clip their hair very short and very badly. And when they returned, it was just before Christmas holiday, when they returned to their high schools, because some were from different high schools in Lisbon and in the other side of the river. I was in the other side of the river. There was a sudden fashion of clipping the hair very short, because these were heroes, and they clipped their hair because they wanted to recognize them. So it was they were heroes, and everybody used them.
That's the power of photography. That's the power of photography.
It was not with photography.
Oh, they were not photographed. No, but they were not photographed.
Maybe they were photographed here. For sure they were, but people saw them and saw what happened, and they did so.
And I guess I'd say two things. First, absolutely, everything everybody said about the sort of constitutive fictionality of photography. But one of the things that's interesting to me is the way theater sort of not only is picking up on that, but also sort of upping the ante, saying not only is photography not objective, but theater is more objective than photography. So there's that aspect. What I was most interested in is thinking about, and I don't know that I portrayed it enough here, but thinking about the temporal and material aspects of this. So where we think about photography, whether it's objective or not, as this frozen moment in time, as this objective material image that circulates and is copied, whereas theater is thinking about, again, an ephemeral experience. And so I thought maybe this morning, right, César, right, was thinking about sort of history and time and those images themselves that she was filming, right, as sort of, again, dynamic, not frozen in time, but right, in multiple temporalities at once, right? So that's one thing I thought was really interesting about that, and as well, and what you were saying as well, that these images are become sort of the basis of not only future images but acts themselves, right? So it's not just the photography as a thing; it becomes a kind of transformative experience that she was talking about today. So, yeah.
Questions? Okay.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for your very interesting papers. I'd like to make two comments. I love the Jesuit, but what I want to say something about, first of all, Garibaldi and the politics of portraiture, because I think it's one of the very interesting things that we haven't thought enough about, is that the role of photographic portraits in the making of the middle class in the 19th century. There's a very interesting book by a historian called Margot Finn, who looks at the role of Garibaldi in the making of the Liberal Party, in the specific alliance that developed between working class radicals and middle class radicals around the politics of Garibaldi, the support for the Polish insurrection, and so forth. So a kind of internationalism that became quite central to a new kind of sense of an emergent politics in that period, in the 1860s in particular. And it's very interesting, for instance, that in the kind of middle-class albums of family photographs, you often find in pictures of Garibaldi in the middle of it. So what you find is a kind of... It's very interesting. I mean, one of the problems is dealers are breaking making up these albums all the time to sell individual pictures, and it means you can't find the insertions. It matters very much whether you have a picture of the bishop or a picture of Darwin in a family album, or whether you have Palmerston or Disraeli in the kind of allegiances of these families are often found in the insertions in family members with very public figures. So I think there's a politics that's being created for family identities, for a new middle class around those things. So I think that the politics of the circulation of the carte de visites of Garibaldi is actually very central to that. So that's just one comment. And if very briefly, if I can, I want to ask you all something about staging. Because you were all kind of, I think, for me, too happy with an idea that the photograph is staged. I think that that's been a position that's been articulated in photographic theory for the last 20 or 30 years. I've always been uncomfortable with it. It seems to me that there's a real problem about what happens to witnessing if you pursue that perspective. So I think in terms of the current ethical turn in photography, the turn to witnessing violence, the turn to witnessing atrocity, the turn to bearing witness, that there's a real epistemological problem if you say only that photography is staged. It seems to me that you have to have at least a dialectic which links the staging to some other kind of evidentiary politics. So that's what I want to say. I want to hear what you have to say.
We have a question there, Mr.
Oh, wait, he answered.
Okay. Okay, so the question, they will answer, then. But we have 3 questions, and then you answer, okay?
Yeah.
3 comments.
Maybe it's not a question, but more
A comment, okay.
Sorry if I misspelled your name. The comment is that I found it a little bit paradoxical, because if I understood well, this method of anthropometry was used in kind of, let's say, left context, yes, ideological left, but the paradox is for me that usually this method was totally right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was like the racist thing ever invented.
Yeah.
When we watch, for example, Euro movie by Agnieszka Holland, there's a moment of the Jew research if somebody is Jew or not. Obviously the method failed, but in my imagination it was always something totally from the right side. The construction of the fundament of the right side ideology created in the 19th century, obviously, and then leading to the Second World War. And then the paradox is that it was used by the leftist propaganda against the church.
Okay.
So it's just a comment.
Your comment?
I was just thinking about, following on from your comment, just thinking about, like, just reading quite a lot of Alan Sekula lately, and Sekula was saying, obviously as a photographer and a theorist, this kind of idea of photographing false being staged was something he had to sit through quite a lot through the 1980s with constructed image, etc. He was also saying another kind of fiction, which is bringing into things that photograph is true in some aspects as well. And maybe when I look at the idea of possibly someone like bringing back John Tagg and some of those ideas, that maybe a more helpful framework to analyse photographs might be thinking rather than this objective, non-objective, and this endless, well-worn academic debate. Maybe it's about looking at the frames in which these practices, he talks about photographies rather than photography, are actually utilised both socially, personally, culturally.
Okay. Comments?
So yeah, I think an important distinction here is that, at least for me, I'm not claiming anything actually about the ontology of photography. I'm saying that in fact in the 19th century, we have a competition over who gets to claim what the truth is, whether it's photographers or theater people, right? So essentially, it may sound like a cop-out, but the ethics may be very much part of that conversation. It's just who is in charge of witnessing. In this case, it's not photographers, right? So witnessing is sort of, and objectivity is just something that's mobile in this case, right? It's just being assigned to a different discipline.
I don't use the word objectivity, but...
Right, okay, so And I'd also say that in fact, I mean, I think what I'm most interested in here is especially thinking about photographies in the sense that both of these positions are present in 19th century culture and in contemporary 20th century theory. So opening oneself up to multiple sort of modalities and methodologies and theories of photography is really important. And I think that's what I again, not in the short paper, but that's what I am sort of suggesting, that attending to photography as an act, again, whether that act is not objective, but true or not, is as important as those other modalities, right? They you know, again, they enrich our sense of what photography is, right?
Well, no, the only thing I want to say, yes, what you said about Garibaldi, and it's very interesting, and it's also very true. In fact, I said that some children were called Giuseppe Garibaldi as a Christian name, and is even more than having the photograph of Giuseppe Garibaldi in your album. And this, we have to think also that Italy was, especially probably the 75% of Italian were analphabet at that time. So photography was really the language that they could possibly read. So I'm only looking in this particular paper at photography as was in that particular time, what kind of language was talking. And so I don't really want to go in a sort of more broad or more contemporary kind of, I'm trying to sort of, I've been trying to behave like if I was in that period, because it's very specific. It's very specific. So look at it now with our way of looking at photography. It obviously opens up so many different questions. I've been trying to be a real analphabet and
And to see.
to see.
Okay. Let's start with anthropometrics.
Yes. Well, I wrote something about it recently, and I do believe, and there's an idea that anthropometrics came from the Bertillonage, from the criminal photography from the late 19th century. I do see anthropometrics in photography before that, in anthropological photography, in the mid-1850s. At the time, I cannot say that it was, well, I can say it was a colonialist approach or so, but these left-wingers, which I don't think they are left-wingers as such, but they are close to those radicals, bourgeois radicals. Well, they were also colonialists. So if we think colonialism in the 19th century as being right-wing, which I'm not so sure about that, for now, today it is, of course. It is a right-wing thing. But at the time, I don't think we can see that as a right-wing or as a left-wing thing. It was something of an idea which was, there was an idea that we could understand people by measuring his distance between the eyes, the size of the ear, the shape of the head, that would show some character. I think, so it was later used to prove something about Jews, and here it really, I don't think they proved anything, because they were priests, they were friars, but they were people from the same ethnic origin as the other people around here. So I don't think they could prove anything with this. I think here it is more just like a humiliation thing than to prove anything. Maybe they wanted really to prove anything, but I don't think they did. So it is an interesting subject, which I think anthropometrics has changed the goals of its use from, yes, let's say from the late 1800s to the 1940s. That's, well, after that, happily, it was something more or less, a subject more or less closed, and I don't think now anyone uses it, even if the worst regimes, I don't think they're using anthropometrics to prove anything. About the idea of the stage and of representation and so on. Well, I do think it's rather different to have let's say, from the point of view of the photographer, to have a portrait studio with a backdrop, with trees and a castle and things like that, and the one of a street photographer with the black Leica, with the masking tape over the red dot, and and trying not to have the stage, trying to be a witness of the real situation, and with the idea of objectivity, which appears on photography, later on, and in the early 20th century. So I think it's rather different. For me, as an historian, the things which are more interesting to me on that is that we have to there's no photography, but photographies, of course. That there is one have to deal with both things. Let's say one have to deal what is on the photography, the information given by the photographer, by the photography, and the way the photographer did it, all the technical and the personal aspects on that. So we have those two things which we have to deal when dealing with photographs, and with dealing with photographs in history, which for me it's my question more than others. But of course, it is not a single thing. Let's say photography is a stage. Well, I work on the late 19th century, early 20th century, and photography was mostly a stage, even if there were still press photographers trying to work the other way, but it was mostly a stage. If we talk about its uses, let's say a snapshot posted on a family album, it's somehow a stage, even if it's a snapshot, not stage on the beginning. So it's not, of course, a new vehicle, an even thing, a unique thing, and it's part of the process.
corpse, and he kissed the dictator in the coffin. So, and it took the photograph of Miss Maria kissing his master. So,
Yeah.
this document, the columns of documentary of photography that is so important.
Yeah. Let me add one thing to what Margarida said. Well, there was always the saying that Maria was not only Maria. Every woman in Portugal was Maria. Now no longer, but at the time, yes. That Maria was not only the lady who took care of the house, but also his lover. So it has a different, another meaning. Oh, and Salazar was something sort of an anti-Garibaldi.
I'm not surprised.
So it's just a comment. Thank you all very much, and I've enjoyed the discussion. But I think the nature of photography has been discussed as being performative by many, many people. And I think we know that. And the performance, interestingly, can always suggest that before, the moment itself is sometimes the most important, and the after. So its nature as performance is, I think, still very important. But I wanted just to reflect on the Benjamin quote, because I think you were sort of not quite clear on your position on that, and I think it points to something that we have to really attend to. This, the nature of history is constructed through the photographic image, and more so today, when we are actually have a consciousness that is shaped by the photographic image, that, as Benjamin says, is a kind of there is a real risk to that, as being a kind of an unconscious and controllable fact of photographic culture. And I think there's more to reflect on in terms of Benjamin, which I think is...
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I tried to oppose. For instance, I spoke with Margarida a few days ago about that. The idea starts on Benjamin, but it goes also through some of the photographic thinking from the late 1960s on. It's the idea that photography is something of anti-history, and we can't build history with photography as photography is a very small frame of time, and it is, and it is a partial document, which of course it is, and for instance, sorry, I don't know your name, but John is photographing us, but it's not photographing you. So it is a partial view of this room. It is a partial view of this room. Well, that is all absolutely correct and absolutely right. But as an historian, I do always work with things like that. It's not different to have a photograph in a newspaper, which I know the photographer took the photograph in some context. It took that moment and not 5 minutes later or 5 seconds later, and they choose that photograph from a number of other photographs. For instance, Gageiro chose that one because he thought it was the more significant one on that series. But, well, in history, we always work like that. We have lots of documents, we have to choose the document, we have to understand the document, and so I don't think it is those small issues, those issues are really a problem with dealing with photographs in history. They are part of the process, and they are part of the process for an historian with photographs, with written documents, which are the main subject of history. We work with written documents. Well, if we work on prehistorical times, maybe we work with pictures drawn on walls, on caves, or etched on caves. So I think it's, of course, Benjamin is more than this, and of course, in a few minutes presentation, which was an introduction to a larger presentation, I can't deal with it. I hope to write a whole book on this. That's my project at the time. But I think the idea is that if we understand how a photograph is made, and if we have the context of it, if we are lucky enough to have a whole series of photographs, for instance, that photograph of Gageiro and the whole contact series on that, we'll understand more, and it will be a useful instrument on writing history.
Allow me just two comments. I was thinking about what our movie director Manuel de Oliveira used to say about films, about cinema. He once wrote that cinema was the recording of theater, meaning that it was true, that it was an evidence of a performance. And another aspect, just another quote from the director of our National Theatre, that is in Museu. We have a new director, and he's trying to promote people to go to the theater, and he said theater is comparing with 3D technology. He said the actors are really there, so it's really a 3D experience. So just to close, thank you very much for your presence.